Hey queer friends, are you ready to be inspired? Welcome to Season 5 of Coming Out and Beyond, a podcast that shares stories from the LGBTQIA+ community. Here's your host, Anne-Marie Zanzal.
Hi, this is Anne-Marie Zanzal here. Welcome back to another episode of Coming Out and Beyond. I am so excited today to have Mallory Kiersten here. She is a self-love and unstuck yourself coach, helping recovering people pleasers reclaim their pleasure and start living life in their authentic expression. Mallory is an erotic blueprint coach in training and accelerated evolution practitioner in training. She is certified in sacred money archetypes, the spiral emotion clearing modality, and Akashic record reader. As the founder of the Expression Academy, Mallory helps budding entrepreneurs step into their uniqueness in order to excel in life and business. Mallory, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So Mallory's pronouns are she and they, and we're going to start the show today by asking Mallory the question I ask every guest on Coming Out and Beyond. Mallory, tell me your story.
It's like such a big question.
I know, isn't it? So tell me your queer story.
Okay, great. So my coming out, my timing was really interesting timing. I came out the year that Barack Obama was up for election. And that was also the same year that in California, where I was living at the time, had Proposition 8 on the ballot. And so if you didn't live in California or you weren't keeping up on California news, that was the gay marriage proposition, where I honestly assume, because the message I got growing up about voting is that if you don't understand the proposition, vote no. And the way that proposition was written was to essentially ban gay marriage. So it required a majority.
Had already been approved.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it was trying to ban it again. And so it required a yes vote, a majority yes vote, in order for that to happen. And I assumed that we had that in the bag. And I just remember I was newly out and I was so heartbroken. But you find out who your friends are with stuff like that. I was out, it was on the ballot, and I had several conversations with people in my life that I ended up just letting go of, because I'm sorry, that's just not an area that we can agree to disagree.
Because it's human rights. It's just human rights. Yeah.
And so I was 20 when all of that was going down, and I had known, but I remember my first crush on, like, not a movie star, like a human, a girl human. I remember that happening in middle school. And I didn't understand a single thing about what was going on. Lesbian was a dirty word. And I think I might have been 10-ish, somewhere around there, when Ellen DeGeneres came out. And I remember before she was officially out, there was so much discussion and disgust behind the discussion around how she was, quote unquote, butching up. She was cutting her hair short. She was starting to wear basically the style of clothing that she wears now, the basketball shoes and and
the nice suits. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm a kid. I don't think anything of it. I'm just like, okay, she's doing.
So where did you grow up in California? Were you in the more conservative area?
Absolutely. I was in the Central Valley.
Okay, that's the farming area, right?
Yes, the agriculture area. I literally was one town away from it's really interesting the things that the cities find to be proud of. So I was not that far away from the town that says we have the most churches per capita in the state. Woohoo! And then, the other town that I grew up by was the cowboy capital of the state.
Mhm.
So
So even though, that's the funny thing is that people assume that California is always super liberal, but it's really depending on where you're from. And if you're in the Central Valley and where you're in the farming and the ranchers are and stuff like that, it is quite conservative. So I can imagine you growing up as a little girl there and hearing all the talk all around you. And if you had moved 200 miles to the west, you probably would have heard a completely different conversation.
Yeah, and I did eventually move
Mhm.
there. I did go to the Bay Area for college, and so different,
Yeah.
night and day.
So did you begin to explore your sexuality when you were in college?
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody experiments in college, right?
Yeah,
So I
absolutely.
was I
Yeah,
was
that's what
experimenting
it's
with
for.
heterosexuality in
Mhm.
college. I did I did have a boyfriend for about a year, and I, you know, he was the guy I lost my virginity to, and I mean, and being the good Catholic girl that I was supposed to be, like I was like, I'm going to finish up school, we're going to get married, we're going to have children, we're going to do that whole thing. And as things happened, I I ended up getting a major crush on a gal that I was doing some musical theater over the summer, and she was choreographing the show, and we were the only people in the show that were the same age.
Mhm.
So we hung out a lot, and we actually ended up singing in church together. And I knew that she was accepting and open-minded, and all of that stuff. And I just I couldn't ignore it anymore.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I ended up having to break things off with that boyfriend, and I don't know that I did it the best way, but there's no easy way to do
Well,
that.
but also too, having been that good Catholic girl that married the boy, even though I knew I liked girls, I think you did him a huge favor
Yeah.
because you guys probably would be, probably getting divorced now because this stuff does not go away. You might have 1.2 children, and it becomes it every time anybody comes out, it's complicated. It just becomes a little bit more complicated when there are more and more people involved, and like husbands and children and stuff like that. So, and also too, Mallory, nobody breaks up with their college boyfriend or girlfriend in the best way.
Because what do we know at 2021?
Well, let me share a really quick story with you. My wife, the first person she really ever had any type of sexual relationship with was with a woman. And so they were together a year, but they didn't even have this was, back in the mid 1980s. She didn't even have an inkling that they could be together, as girlfriends, they
Yeah,
just, it was sort of on the down low kind of thing the entire time.
because there's no template for that in the 80s.
No, there was, especially in Nashville in the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And she got asked out by a boy. And she literally went back to this girl that they've been together for like a year and a half. And she said, we don't have to be gay anymore. So-and-so asked me out. And she, to this day, she shudders, how cruel she was. She
Without even knowing it.
didn't even know it.
Yeah. Oh,
And
tough.
yeah. And so I think most people do that. Most people don't do things the best way all the time.
Yeah.
So how was your family and friends with you? Not that it really matters what they thought, but did you have an okay time coming out, or was it really difficult with you?
Yes.
Yeah. It was difficult, or yes, it was
yes, it was
both
difficult, and yes, it was both. It was
Yeah.
both, essentially. honestly thought that because my dad and stepmom were more of the churchgoers, like I thought that that conversation was going to be harder than it actually was. And it was actually the hardest with my mom, because I think the thing that we forget about also, so I'm an only child.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, with the coming out goes all the dreams that every mom has for their child, of like the white wedding, the 2.5 kids, the picket fence, like all of that goes with it. And I say that from a place of just, you know, really understanding that it was more, that there's more to it, that there's her dreams and her wishes for me that also kind of came crashing down with that. And so I can come from a place of compassion with that now, but I remember at the time feeling like, oh wow, my mom just doesn't accept me, that this is not okay with her. And she did actually say, like, I'm not happy about it, but I love you, you're my child.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, so it wasn't this big dramatic Lifetime original movie, I got kicked out and I was homeless, and you know, and I know that there are people out there who have had that experience, but it was difficult in its own way, because when you grow up the people pleaser, the good girl, and you are looking for that validation outside of yourself, you go your whole life looking for that validation outside of yourself, and then the second that you don't get it, my world came crashing down too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you know, and then when I did eventually have the conversation with my dad and stepmom, it was complicated. So I feel like I can't really leave this part out. I was going to try to talk around it, but I think it just is naturally coming up. So in 2007, when I did have that first coming out conversation with my mom, and I had my world crashing down around not being the good girl anymore, not, you know, my at some level my identity burned up with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I, not having any sort of coping skills at the time, I tried to commit suicide. I made an attempt and decided it was time for a fresh start. I needed to go somewhere else. So I ended up moving in with my dad and stepmom, who lived in the Bay Area, which is the perfect area for me to go.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah.
With no traffic, it would have been 20 minutes to San Francisco, but there's always traffic. So it's like an hour, but still close to that area where there's a lot more acceptance. And so when I had the conversation with them, and I was sort of poking and testing, hey, I'm going to go to this thing. There's this group at school that's, you know, for LGBT. It was just LGBT. We were moving into LGBTQIA. We were moving into that language, but we didn't quite have that yet. And they're allies. And so I'm going to go to that. And I was just kind of testing to kind of see their response. And they're like, okay, cool, have fun. And then my dad straight up asked me, do you identify with those people? And I said, yes. And that was a huge reason for why I crashed my car into a wall. And I remember him getting so angry, and he was very clear. Like, he was very clear. I am not angry at you. You are my little girl. You will always be my little girl. I love you. I love you so much. Thank you for telling me. But I just remember him being angry because to him, the suicide attempt came out of nowhere. And had he known.
Oh my God, Barb, didn't we have a great time at our workshop in January? Things you got to know.
Oh my gosh, it was fantastic. And for those who don't know, this was our workshop for women who are coming out. So many people signed up. It was great connecting with all of those women. And you know what, Anne-Marie? I think we should do it again.
And we are. So we will be hosting this workshop February 19th through the 22nd. It's going to be hosted in the evening this time, 7 p.m. Central Time. And if you want to join us, just go to our website, comingoutssupport.net.
That's comingoutssupport.net. Signing up is easy, it is free, and it is for any woman who is navigating the challenges of coming out.
We'll see you in February.
He
You would have been more
angry with,
supportive.
yeah, he was angry with himself and how everything kind of transpired, because if he had known, I would have been there, I would have
Yeah.
been there for you differently, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so complicated, difficult in its own way, but also highly supportive and amazing. And all of my friends were like, cool.
Mm-hmm.
And at some level, most of them are like, I'm kind of surprised a little bit, but not really, because now that I think about it, so my best friend growing up, she had the hugest crush on Adam Sandler. Like, so whenever we hung out and had sleepovers and whatever, we would usually watch an Adam Sandler movie. But my person was Drew Barrymore. So whenever we couldn't agree on a movie, we would just put on The Wedding Singer. So that way both of us were happy and, whatever. But if
or 50 First Dates.
Yeah, well, that didn't come till later.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, and if it wasn't Drew Barrymore, it was Nicole Kidman, or it was, I had all of these like women crushes. And so they were like, at some level, we're not actually surprised. They knew it before I knew it. Yeah. Even if they didn't know it.
So you have moved from, it's funny because as a coach, you call yourself for recovering people pleasers. So let's hear a little bit more about who you coach and what do you coach about?
Well, I definitely zeroed in on recovering people pleasers, because a lot of the people that come to me they had a very, maybe not a coming out experience, but they had a similar experience where they did all the things, they got their degrees, they got their careers going, maybe they got a house, maybe they're in a partnership of some kind, and then they wake up one day and they go,
what am I doing here?
Is this it?
Yeah.
Is this all that there is?
Mm-hmm.
And they just have this recognition and this knowing that they want the something more.
Mm-hmm.
Because they checked off the list and they're still not fulfilled.
Mm-hmm. I understand that.
And so, and that was my journey. I had lived my life for everybody else around me. And then for me, I consider myself lucky because I was 21 when I started questioning, who is this for? Who am I living my life for? Because it's not for me. And so that happened a little younger for me. It seems like it starts happening more in people's 30s that they start kind of really.
It's usually between 35 and 55 because that's midlife for people. Some people are on the older side of midlife. But the thing is that it's part of our developmental design. It is normal and it is purposeful that we question in midlife. Like, wait a minute, I was told to do this, this, and this, and I would be happy. And I did this, this, and this, and I'm not happy. Or there's something missing, or there's something I'm longing for. And I don't know what it is. Those are the questions people ask at midlife.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I figured out that life could actually be about pleasure, that changed everything. That changed everything.
So tell me about that.
Yeah.
How did you figure that out, and how do you bring that into your coaching business?
So I started questioning rules and all the things that were being fed and all of the things that were being told. My coming out was absolutely a propeller in that direction, because then all of a sudden you're in the queer world where it's like
there's not as many rules.
It's like you have to renegotiate gender roles. You have to renegotiate, all of the things that we just sort of accept as truth. Right. All starts coming into question, all of it. And I started questioning that, and yet still really craved rules.
Mm-hmm.
So my personal development journey is kind of all over the place. I started with, more mindset stuff. I moved into more spirituality, and uh, I grew up in the Catholic Church, and I think this is a common experience for queer folks too. When you're constantly being told that you're going to go to hell,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have a super great relationship with anything in the beyond.
Mm-hmm.
But I moved more into, I don't even know if you could call it Wicca, and more pagan, and started learning and loving and accepting that, divinity can be in all forms.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you, Catholic Church, for having such a focus on Mother Mary,
Mm-hmm.
because that, like, she was really she was my gateway into goddess worship.
Well, they
Which is
have
kind of the opposite of that they were trying to do, but
well, I think that why Mary speaks so people who grow up in the Catholic Church, why Mary is so important to them is because she represents the divine feminine, which is so lacking. And also too, I think that it's so male dominated. We're just looking for a woman to be, and so I think there's a couple of reasons why Mary is so I mean, I used to love Mary as a child too, and would do the May stuff and all that, things like that. And but I realized that I had a hunger for femininity that was spiritual. I had hunger for spirituality that represented me and my femininity, and Mary did that. And so I don't think that's why the Catholic Church has her there. Well, they have her there because she's the mother of Jesus Christ, and she's the biggest intercessor that Jesus Christ has. And but I think that's why people fall in love with Mary so much. And I'm still in love with Mary. That part has not left me.
I don't know if you can see up there, but that's the Our Lady of Fatima.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see that up there. Yeah. Behind. Yeah. Mallory's pointing behind her and showing a picture of the Lady of Fatima for the audio recording.
Oh, okay. For the audio recording. Yeah. That statue that's over there was actually my grandmother's. And when she passed, I was like, this is the only thing that I want. Because I was in love with that story as a little girl. I was like angry with God since I was about 9, because that's when I went through puberty, and so all my prayers went to Mary, because I was like, I feel like you're the only one who can understand. All my prayers went to Mary.
Yeah.
But back to your original question, how I was looking for the rules. And so I was doing all this mindset work, because mindset is everything. I saw that everywhere, and I heard that everywhere. Then I started moving more into spiritual spaces, therapy for emotional regulation, and completely bypassing my physical body. I think that's the important thing to kind of note. My body was just
it was there.
Yeah, it was there. And for me, it's actually been a really major shift in the last 3-ish years, where, okay, my body is on board, and now all of these things can kind of integrate. And I think, our physical bodies, particularly pleasure in our physical bodies, is how we can kind of land those things and embody them with our physical bodies. So pleasure was kind of actually the last stone to turn for me, because I didn't want to look at that. And I think that's kind of true for a lot of people, because we just, no matter your sexual orientation, we just get a lot of really shitty messages about sex.
Well, and in Christianity, in Catholicism, let's just talk about Catholicism. In Catholicism, I mean, there's the whole Madonna whore thing, and and both you and I love the Madonna, which is Mary, if you don't know that.
Yeah.
But the thing is that like my messages about sex were so messed up. Like my mother really believed you should wait till you get married and stuff like that. So when I had sex outside of marriage the first time, because I was a child of the 1980s, and people were doing that back then, and they're still doing it now, and it was okay. I was like, what's all the fuss about? Like I couldn't, like, and being queer was so outside my wheelhouse. I just sort of chalked it up for like, oh well, I guess this is what it's like.
Yeah.
I mean, like, and there's such shame and guilt around sex. So if you've been told your whole life you're not supposed to have sex until after you're married, and then you have sex, then there's a lot of guilt and a lot of shame. And even it's real hard to have pleasure when you're in the throes of guilt and shame when you're having sex with somebody.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And for me, so I'm an erotic blueprint coach in training. You read that in my bio earlier at the intro. And I stumbled upon that at a time where I still did not want to look at sex. I'm literally looking at something called the Erotic Blueprints, and I'm interested in the work, and I don't want to talk about sex.
How did you get out of your comfort zone and go through your fear zone to talk about that? What happened for you?
Well, what happened was I started seeing the applications to life outside of the bedroom before I started seeing the applications, or wanting to see the applications to everything in the bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
And when I could kind of wrap my brain around that, and I started seeing how my life was shifting, I was like, what if I started applying this to my actual physical body and how I engage with myself as a lover?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just rocked my world.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It has rocked my world in a way I could never have anticipated.
Well, what's really interesting too, let me see if I can articulate this right, is that when people don't know much about queer existence, they just reduce it to sex. The only reason we're gay is because we want to have sex with certain types of people that are not heterosexual. And it's what I'm hearing now, which is so interesting. You knew you were gay from a really young age, but you didn't really like enjoy being with your partners until you started to really embrace your own self and your own, like there's this big myth out there that, like, I'm just going to say lesbian sex because just for this description, I mean, they fetishize it. And so that's not what, by folks, that's not what lesbian sex is like that you see in porn. Just not. It can be a little bit, but no. And then the thing is that, people just fetishize it and think it's all about sex, and it's not. And what I'm hearing from you is that even though you identified being a lesbian for a long time, sex wasn't that great until you started to recognize some of the things in yourself that you needed to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember the first time that I ever had sex with a woman. Immediately, it's like, had the orgasm, it was amazing, and then I was looking up at the ceiling, waiting for lightning to strike me dead.
Mm-hmm.
Literally waiting for lightning to strike me dead, and it never came.
Mm-hmm.
And that fear every time I engaged was there. You're not connecting with your partner.
Mm-hmm.
When that's the dominant thought in your mind, you're not connecting.
Mm-hmm.
And even if there is a conversation about it, even if there is, if you can't let it go, it's still walking into the bedroom with you.
Right. So you had to learn to give up your internalized homophobia.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was pretty deep, and you probably weren't aware of it either, right?
No, I had no idea. I had no idea. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess internalized is the best way of talking it, the best way of describing it, because I can look back on, I had a lot of queer friends. I found the queers on campus when I was in college, like, and we all just
Yeah,
like
like,
grouped in the same area of campus and hung out
right.
with each other and had these really open conversations about sex and intimacy. And I would be cheering them on for all of their things. And deep down inside, I'd be like, what's wrong with me?
Hmm.
What's wrong with me?
And so
Uh,
it took you until until you were like 30ish to really realize about the guilt and shame you had about being queer.
Mhm.
And then once you sort of figured all that out and like let go of it, then you were more able to enjoy your queerness, especially in the bedroom
Yeah.
and probably
Yeah.
outside the bedroom too.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the the thing about this and the gift of the coming out for me is that, the recovering people pleaser, it's like, here's this thing about me that I cannot change.
No.
Would not change if I could. It would not change if I could. But here's something that I actually cannot change. It's like asking me, I don't know, to like remove a leg. Like,
Right. You can't, no, you can't. Like I said in the beginning, I think in the beginning we were talking, it will follow you forever.
Right.
It just follows you. So you can't change it. It follows you. And so your thought was Mallory?
And so my thought around that was, okay, here's this thing about me that not everybody is going to like. And I started being able to kind of apply that to other areas. Well, other people aren't going to like that. I don't know, whatever the thing is, like whatever the too much is, the thing, the thing that I laugh too loud, or they're not going to like these other things about me. How, like, can I apply this learning to these other areas? And I found that I could. And so there's a lot of healing that got to take place because of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it gets to
So
be beautiful. After the
as a,
hard shit, it gets to be beautiful.
yeah, yeah. And that's the thing is that, what I thought when I came out is that I thought that people that had come out when they were young or way before me had it all figured out before me. And they didn't, and that's been really life. It's been really interesting for me because someone may have been out 40 years, but they haven't dealt with their internalized or homophobia.
Yeah.
They still have a lot of shame around the fact that they're gay. They've had a lot of trauma in their past, whether they're gay or straight, and they haven't dealt with it. So it's still affecting their joy and their pleasure and all those things like that. And so the biggest learning for me is that not everybody has it all figured. Just because someone's gone down the road before you doesn't mean they have all their stuff together.
And I would argue that nobody has all of their stuff figured out.
No,
Not a single
absolutely.
person out there. And if they are,
they're
I
lying.
have curiosity. I have curiosity about that.
So recovering. Okay, I'm going to ask one question before we end. How can you recognize yourself? Okay, so someone's sitting out here listening to this, and I know what you mean by a people pleaser because I am a recovering people pleaser, so I totally get it. But have somebody's out here saying, what the heck is a people pleaser? How can someone identify themselves as a people pleaser?
How much resentment is showing up in your life?
Mm-hmm.
That's a really great question to ask yourself if you're curious. And I would say that if you're wondering if you are a people pleaser, you probably are. It's just so ingrained in us. And I'm speaking specifically as somebody who was socialized to be a woman, a caregiver, all of the things that women are socialized to be. I would be hard pressed to find someone socialized that way who didn't have some kind of people pleasing tendencies at all.
How do
because
people pleasing tendencies differ in men? Because there are men that are people pleasers
oh,
too.
absolutely, absolutely. And the challenge in the sex coaching world that I hear about most often with men is the good boy syndrome um, often affects how assertive they feel like they can be because they don't want to be predatory, and so their Madonna whore is probably more along the lines of predator and not predator, like
Right.
they don't have a foundation for consent asking and that kind of they don't have that framework to work
Right.
in with.
Right.
And I would say with uh, I would say that that's probably more where the good boy people pleasing tendencies can kind of show up with. At least that's what I see, and that's been my experience. I don't want to speak for all men out there.
No, I have an article that I wrote in my blog piece about men and divorce, and it's called Good Guy. And it's where men do not want to be perceived as the person that's causing the divorce. And so they want to be perceived as the good guy. And so sometimes when their wife comes out, even though there has been, a lot of problems in the marriage over the years, everything gets placed firmly on the wife's gay shoulders, or vice versa, not, and because they want to make sure everybody knows it's not their fault that they got divorced.
Yeah.
And so I think our men really struggle with people pleasing in the sense they always want to be good guys, that they have to be, they can't want a divorce because good guys don't want a divorce, So I'm going to throw you a couple curveballs because Mallory was on my other podcast, Queer Business Success. So you can hear more about her business on that one. So I said, oh, don't worry about filling out the form for coming out and beyond. So these are the 3 questions I ask everybody at the end of the show. So do you have a coming out song?
Oh gosh, I'm so blanking on the title, but it's like the coming out anthem by the Indigo Girls.
Oh, Closer to Fine.
Closer to Fine. Yes, that was it. I remember listening to that on repeat when I was 21. I was newly 21. No, the first Dinosaur weekend I got to go to. The day one of that Dinosaur weekend was my 21st birthday. So I was listening to that song on repeat, driving down to Palm Springs, and yeah, that was it.
For those who don't know, tell people what the Dinosaur weekend is.
Oh gosh, it's a big lesbian gathering.
And there's lots and lots of lesbians of all shapes and sizes.
Absolutely.
And I
was really
and
into
ages
that.
too.
Yeah, and I was really into that website. They closed down for a while, but I think they opened up again after Ellen.com. And so there were a lot of queer like comedians that were doing vlogs on there. This is way before TikTok and all these things that have evolved since then. But I was like a constant consumer of all of the website content on that website. And so I got to meet some of those people in person. I got to meet Jane Lynch. Yeah. Okay.
It was fun.
Lots of fun.
Do you have a book or a movie that really profoundly changed your life? That when you read it, you said, or you had such an aha moment with it?
Imagine Me and You.
Why?
Because I think that was the first. I'm crying. I think that was the first thing that I saw that really gave me hope.
Yeah.
I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it, but there was so much out there that was so dark at the time that ended up, the stories ended with somebody committing suicide or dying from a long illness. Like there was no happy ending lesbian literature out there. And so when I encountered that movie and there was a happy ending and there was a romance and it followed that rom-com story.
Romance story,
yeah. I think I had hope.
I like that's a very cute movie. You know, it's a great movie too. It's an old lesbian movie called Desert Hearts. It's from the 80s. You need to go and watch it because my wife and I came out later. And so like luckily she like said, you need a lesbian education. So I watched these movies that were from when she was like a young lesbian and stuff like that. And so she was like, oh, you gotta, and she was like, oh, they're all so bad. The same thing you are, everybody dies, someone dies of cancer or someone commits, somebody completes suicide or something like that. And so we watched Desert Hearts together, and she was like, this is actually a really good movie. It was from the 1980s. There's a happy ending. It's an opaque happy ending, but you have to watch it. So you got to watch that. And and there's some really great scenes too. I mean, they don't skimp on the scenes. So I know it's actually a great lesbian movie. And I highly recommend everyone who is over 30 to go under 30 to go watch it. Yeah. So how would you describe your life today, Mallory?
So beyond anything that I could have conceived for myself.
Mm-hmm.
Life is good.
So I will end it at that. Mallory, thank you so much for coming out on the show today and sharing your coming out story and a little bit about what you do with your business. How can people find you?
Yeah, so I am the Joy Goddess on TikTok and Instagram. And MalloryKiersten.com is my website. All of my social handles are on there as well. And on Facebook, which is where I most frequent, it's Mallory.Kiersten.888.
Great. Thank you, Mallory.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA plus stories with Anne-Marie Zanzal. New episodes of the Coming Out and Beyond podcast drop every other Friday. You can tune in at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and at annemariezanzal.com. Be sure to hit subscribe when tuning in so you never miss an episode. And for more resources, articles, videos, and a free downloadable guide for coming out later in life, visit annemariezanzal.com.